You're about to enter into a new world of knowledge, curiosities, and high strangeness. This is a podcast of Straight Up Strange Productions.
You're listening to Mysteries and Monsters. I'm your host, Paul Bestall. The world of cryptozoology tends to not dwell on some encounters that leave fatalities behind, and yet we know that some of these cases do exist. Joining me to look at some notorious cases is our good friend Richard Freeman. We'll dive into some cases from America, Africa, Europe, Asia, Australia and South America. And thank you to Richard for joining me to discuss some of these very unsettling cases. But before that, of course, don't forget you can support Mysteries and Monsters by signing up at patreon.com/mystriesandmonsters. $4 a month gets you ad-free episodes, guaranteed early releases, bonus content and more. Thank you to each and every one of you for your contributions, and thank you to my latest patrons, Dave and Linda. Thank you for joining the team, and thank you to all of you for your continued support. Mysteries and Monsters is across most social media platforms. Please subscribe to the Mysteries and Monsters channel on YouTube. You can also visit mysteriesandmonsters.com for news and episodes. Our exclusive merchandise site is via TeePublic, and you can find the link for that in the show notes too. Our intro and outro music is performed by the marvellous Weary Pines. Thank you as always to Dean Bestall for his wonderful artwork, and the show is produced by Mr. Brennan Storr of the Ghost Story Guys. Richard Freeman joins us now as we look at cases of death by cryptid. For many of us, the cryptids that fascinate us are often framed or portrayed as friendly, even fearful of humans. Yet if you look hard enough, it soon becomes apparent that there are numerous alleged deadly encounters with unknown creatures from around the world. Of course, who better to send some shivers down our spines than our good friend, Mr. Richard Freeman. Richard, welcome.
Hello, back again. I think this is my 11th time on the show.
Yes. Well, and now we finally met in person, Richard. It's taken it to a whole new level. We're still talking.
After all these years. How long have I known you without actually meeting you? It's been donkey's years. How long?
A good 10.
Oh, God, it must be, yeah.
Because we spoke before I started the show, and I've been doing the show 6.5 years, so it's probably about 10 years we've known each other, mate. So yes, nice to get drunk in your company at last.
All right.
Yes, so, I mean, we obviously had a wonderful time together, along with many other people at the marvellous Strange Days Festival at the beginning of September, Richard, and it was incredible, really, wasn't it, to see so many like-minded, chilled out, interesting people all sort of hanging out and having a great time listening to a variety of speakers and bands.
What a great weekend it was altogether. It's fantastic. The only trouble is with things like that, because you're talking to so many people and you're getting your attention pulled this way and that, you can't see everything. You can never get to see all of the talks because so much is going on.
Absolutely. It's one of those few moments in our lives, Richard, where I'm all for cloning of some description so we can fit everything in.
Since that weekend, I can also boast that I was outbid for the preserved foot of a 19th century priest by a Tasmanian bone collector.
Well, that's not a story most of us will ever have, Richard.
No.
Yes, I returned back with some death paraphernalia from that marvellous stall that lady was selling wonderful sort of repurposed dead animals as art.
She was the one that outbid me for the free foot. Yeah.
Is that who beat you?
Yeah, she had more money on her. Sid Quatrain was flogging a preserved priest's foot. God knows where he got it. But she had it.
Well,
she took it back to Tasmania.
Brilliant. It's probably what she feeds the thylacines.
I'll have to break into her house and nick it in between looking for the Tasmanian.
Well, I look forward to seeing your mugshot on Channel 9 News, Richard. Have you seen this man and this foot?
I did get a bit of his spine, though. I got one of his vertebrae.
Oh, well, it's not a bad result then in the end. You've got some dead foot bonage upon you.
Yeah, it's going to a museum in Wales.
Ah, fabulous.
There's a museum called
very good.
Bratton's Museum of the Paranormal, which you should visit if you get a chance. It's really good. It's in Carmarthen. And
all right.
A couple called Laura and Eric. They were going to be at the weekend, but they couldn't make it because they had to look after their nephew. But it's a fantastic place, and I've been collecting occult antiques for them, and it's really good. So if you ever get them on the show, it's been open a little over a year now, but it's a really great place. It's got some absolutely unique stuff in it, and items from all over the world. It's really cool, and they get in a grey mare, Mary Lloyd, as well. In January, you know the Welsh thing with the horses still on the pole with the bridal gown. Yeah, they're getting one of them. And it's really cool.
Ah, brilliant. Ah, fantastic. I'll have to try it because I love Wales. So I don't need much of an excuse to visit it again, Richard, and that's given me a perfect reason.
Yeah, well, I'll send you the link to their website.
That would be brilliant. Thank you, mate. Thank you. As I said in the introduction, Richard, there are more than a few stories that challenge the overly positive impression that we have about certain cryptids, that I think sometimes people think that these aren't wild animals that we may possibly be talking about, and they seem to treat them as domesticated animals of some description, because I can't remember how many sort of cuddly, fluffy krakens or nessies I've seen over the years, Richard. But for us lovers of the strange and the unusual, there is more than enough hair-raising stories where it's not just our big hairy friends in the forest, is it?
No. Well, I honestly never felt afraid of the monsters I've been hunting. And I've been hunting strange creatures for a quarter of a century now. I've never been afraid of the creatures themselves. I mean, I've been stalked by a tiger, attacked by a cobra. But the things that scare me most is bureaucracy and getting there and getting back, and all the bullshit you have to endure while you're getting to a place, and all the human red tape. That's what annoys me. But there are these stories of cryptids, both on land and in water, that have, on very rare occasions, supposedly killed human prey. And perhaps the best known of them occurred in March in 1962. And it didn't begin then, but as far as our story goes, it began on a sunny morning on the 25th of March in 1962, when a group of children were walking along a beach several miles from Pensacola in Florida, and they came upon what they thought was the drowned body of a teenage boy. But to their amazement, he was alive, barely, and he was rushed to Pensacola Naval Base Hospital, suffering from shock and exposure and exhaustion. And he was identified as Edward Brian McClary, and he'd been reported missing the previous day along with 4 friends. When he was strong enough, he spoke to a guy called E.E. McGovern, who was the director of the search and rescue units. And his story was amazing. It's like something out of a horror novel. He claimed that his companions had been killed by a sea serpent. Now, the day before, he was with a bunch of his friends, Eric Rule, Warren Sully, Brad Rice, and Larry Bill. And they were all going to go out diving on the wreck of a ship called the Massachusetts, which was several miles off the coast of Pensacola. And they got a 7-foot Air Force life raft, and they went out to go and dive off the ship. But they found that the tide was stronger than they had anticipated, and storm clouds began to gather, and they decided it'd be better to turn back. But the current was so strong that several of them had to get out behind this raft and swim behind it and push it along. But the waves grew higher and higher. They tried to signal a passing boat, but it didn't see them. And eventually the raft was swamped, and they had to swim to a 20-foot buoy. And they clambered up onto its metal scaffolding. And there was a violent storm that followed, and they were clinging onto this buoy as it was rocked by the lashing winds. The raft was sucked under, and there was icy rain. They were clinging on for dear life. Then finally, the maelstrom passed, and a fog rolled in, and the sea became as still as a mill pool, dead calm. Then there was a foul smell, according to Edward, akin to dead fish that filled the air, and a strange whining cry that echoed through the dark. Then he says that something as long as a telegraph pole reared up out of the water and plunged back in. And the boys at this panicked, and they jumped off the buoy and started swimming. And they heard a hissing and splashing sound behind them. And then suddenly Warren yelled out, "Help, help, it's got Brad, it's got Brad." And then Warren's cries were cut short. And the three remaining boys huddled together and tried to swim for shore. Then something from underneath the water grabbed Larry and pulled him under. So the two remaining boys were, that's Eric and Edward, were becoming exhausted and tried to swim for shore and stay afloat. But Eric was getting weaker and weaker, and the sea was now turning choppy again, and it pulled them apart. Then, according to Edward, a monstrous reptilian beast reared up from the deep, and it had this long snake-like neck. It was gleaming green in colour. It had green eyes and a gaping mouth full of teeth, and it sort of reared up like a striking cobra, and then fell down on Eric and dragged him under. Now, Edward swam for his life, and expecting to feel the monster's teeth in his flesh at any moment, and he began to get that tranquility of death that people who've nearly drowned say that they have, where they become strangely calm. Then he recalled nothing further until he was in hospital. Unsurprisingly, he had a breakdown afterwards, but the police decided it would be better if they kept the whole story of the sea monster out of the official report, and it said that they just drowned. After talking to Edward, E. McGovern said, "The sea has a lot of secrets. There's a lot of things we don't know about. People don't believe these things because they're afraid to. Yes, I believe you, but there's not much else I can do." Now, afterwards, Edward suffered a mental breakdown, and he was silent for years about the story. He gave one interview to Fate magazine years later, and he's passed away now. But I've seen an interview with his son, and his son said that his dad had told him the whole story, and he kept by this story until his death.
It's a remarkable story, Richard, because I think the fact that McCleary gave the one interview and then never spoke about it again all the way up to his death, which I think wasn't that long. I'm thinking he probably passed away, when was it, 2017, something like that?
Yes, I think
10 years ago, I think. Because by that point, I'd kind of heard that story a couple of times before he passed away. And I was always intrigued by it, because you've got... It's not a story that has been told by a friend of a friend or somebody who knew him or knew the truth or whatever. He gave this interview in, I think it was about 3 years afterwards, after he'd been released from psychiatric hospital, I think, when he got the all clear. And he basically gave this interview with Fate, went through everything, and then he never, ever, as far as I'm aware, he was offered quite considerable amounts of money to talk about it again, and he flatly refused to discuss anything about it.
Yeah, and some people said that, that he hallucinated it. It was survivor's guilt, or they were taken by sharks, or they just drowned, and he made this story up to sell it to Fate magazine. But if that was the case, why stick to it until he died? And if you go online and look for it, there is an interview with his son. It goes into quite some depth about it.
Yeah. Yes.
It stayed with him all his life. And if you were going to invent something, surely you would say it was sharks.
Yes.
That ate them. Why make it more unbelievable?
Yeah, exactly. There are many a creature that we know that lives in the sea that would quite happily munch away on a group of swimmers, Richard. You don't need to invent strange creatures to cover a tragic accident up, or, you know, they got into difficulty because obviously the wreck or the mooring that they were going to go, the USS Massachusetts, I think it was the ship, wasn't it? That was sort of out in the Gulf at the time. Because I think, strangely enough, not long after he did his interview, the ship was saved and moved to a naval museum, and the USS Massachusetts, I think, is still in dry dock somewhere in the States. I think you can visit the ship itself to this day, Richard. So
I didn't know that. I thought it was still at the bottom of the sea.
No, it was rescued. Yeah, not long. It wasn't long. I think it's around the time. I don't know if it happened before or after, but 1965 they raised enough money to salvage it and return it, and it was refitted and everything, and it's been fully repaired, as far as I'm aware, and it is available in dry dock to go and visit it. Because sometimes they have that thing about renaming ships. So you'd have like the USS Massachusetts 2 or whatever, and, you know, something very original like that. But as far as I'm aware, that ship that they were going to go see is still in one piece. It's been saved. So who knows, my friend?
But it's far from the only aquatic creature that is supposed to have eaten people.
Yes.
There's a lake called Lake Wembu, or Wembo, in Tibet. And in June of 1980, people living around the lake reported that there was a house-sized creature with a long, scaly neck and a large head living in the lake. And it was reputed to have destroyed boats and rafts and eaten a fisherman. And it also devoured a yak tethered close to the lake that belonged to a Communist Party official. Now, this is in a high-altitude lake, cold water, so it's not going to be a crocodile. So whatever it was wasn't a crocodile, but it's one of those cases that just seem to have petered out. I've never heard anything else from Lake Wembu. Maybe it's because it's in Tibet and they're a bit tight-lipped over there, but I've no idea. I've never heard any more from Lake Wembu, just this one story. And it'd be fascinating to go over there and see if anybody remembers this, or if it's still a living tradition in the lake.
It is peculiar how we have some of these stories that seem to be quite standalone. I mean, you can kind of understand these days why perhaps we don't know more about Lake Wembo, primarily because of the political situation out there. But as you were saying about McCleary, that's a major body of water, Richard. There could be, and as we know, I mean, this happened, 63 years ago, when McCleary's friends disappeared. What we knew about the creatures that lived in the sea in 1962 is probably incomparable to what we know now, especially, you know, the discovery of things like giant squid and the like, and the proof of the sizes that they can get to, and different species of whale and different species of shark that we've discovered in that period since. So for him to make that leap and create a sea monster story has never made sense to me, like you say, and it would be the same for somewhere like Lake Wembo, because of the way the people are and the authoritarian regimes that they have there and that they have to deal with on occasion. These aren't the places where tall tales come from often, Richard.
Yeah, but you get information on lake monsters in China reaching the west, but why not Tibet, I wonder? But it would be very interesting to see if it's still an ongoing case. But more recently, there's a lake in the south of Siberia that, again, is the setting for a series of events that run like the plot of a horror movie or a horror novel. And this is one of Siberia's largest lakes, and it's called Lake Chany. It's virtually unknown in the West, but it covers 770 square miles. It's 57 miles long by 55 miles wide, but it's fairly shallow, only 23 feet deep, but it's deepest. And it borders onto Kazakhstan, so it's in southern Siberia. But locals there living around the lake say that there's an animal there that is about 30 feet long, serpentine, that has killed and eaten over 19 people. And it is supposed to ram boats, and when people fall into the water, grab them and devour them. And there was a 59-year-old fisherman called Vladimir Golshev, who was in a boat fishing with his friend. And this is what he said happened. I was with my friend some 300 yards from the shore. He hooked something huge on his bait and stood up to reel it in, but it pulled with such force that it overturned the boat. I was in shock. I'd never seen anything like it in my life. I pulled off my clothes and swam for shore, not daring to hope I'd make it. He didn't make it, and they found no remains. It's time to find out the truth. Another case, this happened in 2007. 23-year-old Special Services soldier Mikhail Doronin was lost when something capsized his boat. His 80-year-old grandmother, Nina, was watching from the shore of the lake, and she said that the lake was calm. Her husband, 81-year-old Vladimir, said, something on an awesome scale lives in the lake, but I've never seen it. Now, the people living around Lake Chaney have asked for an official investigation, but they've just got the brush off from the authorities. They said that most of these are just drownings, people getting drunk and falling into the lake and drowning. But chunks of them are washing ashore that have been chewed by something. They have teeth marks in them. And everybody says that whatever it is ramming the boats and knocking people into the water. They're not getting drunk and falling into the water. There's one blurry photograph that shows what is purported to be part of the monster sticking up out of the water like a fin, but it could be just about anything. To me, it sounds like a gigantic eel more than anything else. But back before the current situation with Russia and the Ukraine, I was trying to get TV companies interested in going to this lake and doing a proper investigation with baited cameras and underwater cameras and going out on the lake with sonar and stuff. And nobody was interested. You've got a story here that's like a real-life freshwater Jaws, and it's happening in Siberia. 19 people have been eaten by a monster. The authorities are not interested. What a great story, but absolutely no TV company was even vaguely interested in doing this. And now we've lost the opportunity, because I don't think I'll be visiting there until Putin's long gone.
Yes. I mean, how do you view the Lusca, Richard? Because I think when it comes to deadly creatures of the sea, I think the Lusca seems to be the one that's reached more people over the last 10 years or so, even to the point that Jeremy Wade did an episode of River Monsters about the Lusca, because he went to Andros Island looking for it and essentially kind of pulled the witness reports apart, not disputing them or saying he didn't believe what was going on, but the fact that, in his opinion, what people were describing, because often people will say it's some kind of half shark, half octopi hybrid, what they were able to demonstrate quite easily was that octopus can, as we well know, can change their body shape into all kinds of manner of weird and wonderful shapes. They can copy other animals. They can pretend they're the sea floor. They can be a rock. They've got such control over their muscles, Richard, that in his opinion, what he said people were reporting as a shark-octopus mixture was essentially a very, very large octopus that would give the impression of a shark's head, but with tentacles, because people weren't sort of realising what they were looking at until it was too late.
Yes, and of course, because an octopus, its only solid part is the beak, so it can squeeze through tiny spaces, and people have been pulled under and disappeared in the inland lakes, these blue, deep lakes they have that connected to caves. People have been reported being pulled under. And one theory is that these huge octopus go through the caves, squeeze through the caves and grab people in these lakes and take them back into the caves and eat them. And there was one report of fishermen seeing a dead octopus floating in the Bahamas that had tentacles 50 feet long.
I mean, currently, Richard, the giant octopus is the largest of the species, is it not?
The giant octopus from the west coast of America, yeah. That gets to about 23 feet, but these ones are supposed to be much, much bigger.
And essentially, any human, be it a swimmer or a diver or somebody that's fallen overboard, Richard, any octopus of a certain size, it doesn't even need to be that big, does it? They can basically manhandle you whether you want to or not.
Most of them are not aggressive towards human beings. There's the blue ring octopus, which is highly poisonous if provoked, but most of them aren't aggressive. But these huge ones, if they're as big as they say they are, they would just look on a human being as another prey item.
Yes. Do you think it's one of those that gets overlooked because of, or it doesn't get treated as seriously, perhaps, as some other creatures, Richard, because of where it is? Whereas that's what struck me about when Jeremy Wade went there, because, as I say, often he's not trying to make out that these people are idiots or there's nothing to these stories. Time and time again, he's proven that what these local people are having issues with or what's been going on. There are some very strange and dangerous creatures that live in water that turn up in places that they're not supposed to be in. And why wouldn't we have some kind of weird giant species of octopus when we know already, as we say, how large the giant can get that we've found so far, as well as everything that we've learnt about the squid and the size differentials with that one as well, Richard? We're only scratching the surface with these creatures, are we not?
Yeah, it's odd that some cryptids get more coverage than others. I mean, every time, there's a cryptozoological documentary, they know they're going to go on about Bigfoot in it. They're not going to be talking about, for example, surviving moas, the possibility of surviving moas, or they're not going to be talking about Machelium bembe, or not very often anyway. But some get more coverage than others. When was the last documentary you saw about Washington's eagle? For example.
Yes. Or the Stenner seal.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, I suppose with anything, they tend to focus on the more popular ones, but it makes them not. It's usually if we've got a sea cryptid documentary, Richard, more often than not, they're looking for the megalodon, which there's very little evidence of any surviving. No. We've got enough big sharks out there anyway without inventing a new one.
No, whatsoever. It looks like it's been superseded in the biggest marine predator, because now we have Ichthyotitan severnensis, the giant ichthyosaur.
Yes.
Which looks like it was the biggest predatory animal that ever lived. Only known from parts of its jaw from the mid-Triassic that we know the group of ichthyosaurs, the shastosaurs that it belonged to, and they were very bulky-bodied animals. And they reckon that this thing was 80-odd feet long and about 140 tons, but it was a sub-adult. So they say that an adult would probably have been 300 tons. Can you imagine that? An aquatic reptile, a predatory aquatic reptile, weighing 300 tons. That's some Toho Studios shit right there, isn't it? That's a real-life agent.
Absolutely. I expect that to be living on Monster Island with Godzilla and Mothra and the rest.
But you think that thing was swimming around in the sea on our planet. It was a real animal, bigger than a blue whale.
Yeah.
It's 100 tons heavier than the biggest blue whale. Incredible.
Yeah, it is. I mean, this is the thing as well. I'm often, what I've learned since being a young lad really interested in paleontology, Richard, is how we only know what we've found. And at the minute, that's why I'm not surprised anymore. I used to get really surprised when we found a new giant dinosaur, either on land or evidence of a sea-based one. And nowadays, I just go, meh. Just doesn't surprise me. I expect something to come along that shakes the foundations of paleontology more often than not, Richard.
Staying in Siberia, there's another lake in eastern Siberia called Lake Lavinica, which has a really evil reputation. It's incredibly deep. It's 800 miles long. It never freezes. It maintains a temperature of about 2 degrees Celsius. And locals say that a devil inhabits the lakes, and gun dogs that have leapt into the water to retrieve ducks that have been shot have been eaten by the monster. One man said how it pursued his raft. It was a great grey beast with an enormous mouth. And reindeer hunters said their dogs have chased deer into the lake, and it's come from grabbed full-grown deer and pulled them under. In the 1920s, there was a Russian author called Gennady Borodulin, and he recounts a a tale he was told by the local people in his book, A Trip to the Cold Pole. And the local people are called the Evenks, and they're nomadic reindeer herders. And these ones were staying overnight by the shore of Lake Lavanica. And a child went down to the bank of a stream that led into the lake while the adults were busy. And suddenly the adults heard the boy screaming. And the father and the grandfather rushed to the bank. They stopped at the edge of the water and saw the child being carried away by a huge unknown animal to the centre of the lake. It was dark with a mouth looking like a bird's beak, and it held the child above the water and moved away, leaving a great wake behind it. So the grandfather swore revenge on this devil, and he made a sack out of animal skin and stuffed it with reindeer fur, rags, dry glass, pine needles, and put a smouldering piece of wood into it to set it on fire. So outside it's got the fresh animal hide, but inside it's on fire. He attached the stack by a rope to a huge stone and threw it into the lake as far as he could. And according to the story, at night there were noises and splashes and terrible screams of the devil. And in the morning, found a huge dead animal, about 23 feet long, with a huge jaw that was almost 1/3 the size of the body, and relatively small legs and fins. And the old man cut open the animal's stomach and took out the body of his grandson and buried him at the bank of the stream. And since then, the stream has been called the Dream of the Child. The actual description doesn't fit with anything known to science, but it's been seen a number of times since. There was a 1963 expedition where 4 members observed the creature. They didn't come close enough for them to photograph it. But nobody really knows what it is in Lake Lavanica. But it's another place that I'd love to go and love to put bait into, because that description doesn't sound like anything known to science. But another 1964 expedition, 2 journalists from the Italian magazine Epoca went there, and they were told about a party of men who saw a reindeer swim into the lake and then vanish under the surface, and the dogs that were chasing it were grabbed as well by some huge creature. And they saw this thing shrouded in mist rising up out of the lake, making a snorting noise. But since then, very little. And it's another place that I'd like to go. Just because we haven't heard anything from these places doesn't mean that it's there's nothing happening there, because this is Siberia in Russia. So it's a non-English speaking country that's on very bad terms with the West at the minute. So on top of that, these are nomads in what the remotest part of Russia. It's closer to Canada than it is to Moscow. So it's not not unusual. It wouldn't be unusual that we're not hearing anything from there. But if the new Cold War ever thaws out, that's another place I'd like to go.
Definitely. Yes, there are some very strange stories attached to certain bodies of water in certain parts of Russia, amongst many, it would seem, Richard. And you wouldn't be surprised, because a lot of it does seem to be very uninhabited, vast trenches of land that people may not have even trod on for thousands of years. It's such a vast area. Yeah,
and you think about forests, you think that the Amazon is the biggest forest. It's not, it's the Russian taiga. It goes from the borders of Europe all the way through the Pacific coast, pretty much broken.
Yeah, absolutely. But once again, it's one of those places that people just don't talk about because of where it is, I think, Richard.
And moving on into...
Plenty of room for a Yeren.
Oh, yeah. Moving on into warmer waters in South America, we've got stories of the giant anaconda eating people. Now, we know they get to about 30 feet long, and there are persistent reports of snakes far, far larger in the rivers and swamps of tropical South America. And one huge anaconda was reported near Sao Paulo in Brazil, and a farmer cum hunter called Joe Mendes was fishing with his 3-year-old son Daniel and turned his back on the boy to store some fish in a wooden shack. And suddenly he heard his son scream, and he was horrified to see that an anaconda that he said was 45 feet long had risen from the water and seized the boy by the neck. And he tried to prise the snake's jaws apart. That's the worst thing you can do, because the teeth point backwards. And if you try and pull away from it, they're just going to embed deeper. So if you're ever bitten by a big python or anaconda, Paul, the thing to do is push your arm further in, and that makes them let go. But he ran home for his rifle, but by the time he got back, the boy had been constricted and swallowed. The herpetologist Mark O'Shea travelled to a remote area of Peru and learned of a monster anaconda 40 feet long. He interviewed a woman whose husband had been devoured by the creature. The snake had overturned his boat and proceeded to constrict him and swallowed him. And it had also swallowed a fisherman that it had snatched from the riverbank. The Swedish explorer, Rolf Blomberg, wrote in his book, his 1956 book, Buried Gold and Anacondas, of 2 fatal attacks by anacondas in Ecuador. One man was killed on the Napo River in Ecuador when he went for a swim and was entwined by one of these snakes. He struggled in vain to get away, but was drawn underwater and carried off. Later, he was found further downstream, dead, and bearing the distinct marks of the ghost squeeze. What a great name for constriction, the ghost squeeze. Evidently, the reptile had been unable to devour so large a victim. The other occurred at the mouth of the Yasuni River, a tributary of the Napo. Some children were bathing, and a boy of 13 suddenly disappeared. His friends were sure they saw bubbles rising from a spot near the shore, and one of the boys dived down to search. He came up pale with fright. He felt around for his friend in the water and had touched something he was sure was an enormous snake like an anaconda. He'd often been told that the gigantic anaconda haunted the river hereabouts and was said to have swallowed 2 persons. No doubt the same fate had taken his friend. The dead boy's father was determined to take vengeance on the murderer, and day after night, in an unwearied search, he discovered the reptile. It was lying with its body half out of the water, the other half in the water. It had vomited up the devoured boy. With 5 shots of his Winchester, the boy's father killed the snake. It was an enormous anaconda. Now, a few years ago, I was going up to visit John in North Devon. I was taking a train from Exeter to Barnstable, and I happened to be sitting back next to a very beautiful Latin American girl. Her name was Sandinelli, and we got talking on the train. It transpired she was from Ecuador, and she'd been working as a barmaid in a Devon pub while she travelled around England. We talked about Ecuadorian folklore and wildlife, and she told me that she'd seen a newspaper story back home about possible victims of giant anaconda. Apparently, the man was an escaped convict, and his body was found in the jungle and half digested. The authorities concluded he'd been killed and eaten by an anaconda, and had vomited him up halfway through digestion. And once again, South America, particularly with native peoples, you're never going to hear this. If they get taken by a giant anaconda, it's not going to, unless there's like a person there to record the story, it's never going to get out of the tribes of down the Amazon or the Orinoco or the Essequibo or wherever. I was told by, when I went looking for the giant anaconda, I was told by our guide Damon Corrie, a place called Corona Falls. We couldn't get to it because there was too bad of a drought on at the time. He said that there was a guy there who was grabbed and killed and swallowed by a huge anaconda a few years ago.
Do you think, when it comes to stories of the giant anaconda, Richard, people always point to probably the most famous one, which is probably a tall tale, which is Percy Fawcett, infamous for disappearing, trying to find the lost city of Z, or Z, depending on where you are in the world. And so it would seem that when it comes to giant anaconda stories, Richard, people tend to disprove them purely based on Fawcett, where we know how large snakes can grow anyway, without talking about the largest snake on the planet. So I find it odd that some people just dismiss stories of giant man-eating anacondas out of hand, because why wouldn't there be creatures that big in the Amazon? Nobody's there.
Well, the Percy Fawcett story is suspect, not because the length of the snake, he said it was 62 feet, but he said it was only 12 inches wide. Anacondas are very thick, bulky snakes. The bones of an anaconda would be more than 12 inches wide, that size, without the muscle and the flesh on them. But there have been plenty of other sightings of giant anacondas. A giant anaconda, 60 foot long, is going to be at least 4 foot thick, at least. Titanoboa was about 1.5 meters thick, and at its thickest, and the giant anaconda may be even bigger. They've actually found an even bigger snake than Titanoboa now from India, Vasuki indicus, 50 feet long. And then, of course, we've got the one of the best photographs of a cryptid was taken of this creature in 1959 by from a helicopter piloted by a Belgian fighter pilot called Remy van Leyden. And van Leyden is a fascinating character as it is. He was a Belgian pilot, fought in World War II, and he was captured by the Nazis and put in a concentration camp in Spain. And he escaped from it and by foot got all the way to England, joined the RAF, and spent the rest of his war fighting with the Royal Air Force against the Nazis. Then after the war, he became a charter pilot in the Congo, which then was still the Belgian Congo. And in 1959, he was flying over the Katanga region of the Congo. And he passed over a clearing in the jungle, and he said he saw an immense snake come up out of a hole. And he said that it was greenish in colour with a paler underside, and he estimated it to be 50 feet long. And he said he was very good at estimating sizes from being a pilot. And he said he was about 40 metres up, and he said this thing reared up. He said its head was 3 feet long and 2 feet wide, and it struck at the helicopter. And he said if they'd have been lower down, he was convinced that it would have actually hit the helicopter if they'd have been low enough. And he said it was easily big enough to have eaten a man. And he made several passes so a friend of his could photograph it whilst he was piloting the helicopter. And these photographs show this huge snake in the jungle clearing. And some people say that they can see termite mounds, which they've used to estimate the length of it. I can't see any of the termite mounds in this photograph. But what somebody did recently was go onto Google Earth, and they found that the rock formations in this clearing near Katanga in the Congo, and they matched up his photograph with it, patched it over. And if his estimate that he was about 40 metres up, if that was correct, it would have meant that this snake was indeed in the region of 50 feet long. That's a 50-foot tube of muscle, which could easily devour you. There are other stories of giant snakes from Africa as well. Mary Kingsley, the Victorian lady explorer, said that she heard of one that was the length of a missionary house in Africa, in West Africa, which would have made it 42 feet long. And there was another guy, I think his name was Alito Gatte, and he was a Italian explorer, and he made 12 trips to Africa. He was the first person to capture an okapi alive and bring it back to captivity. And he said that he was attacked in some caves in East Africa by a huge rock python, and he managed to kill it by shooting it in the head. And afterwards, they measured it at 37 feet. So there are a number of stories, like there are with the giant anaconda, of African rock pythons growing much, much bigger than the textbooks say they should. And we know that occasionally African rock pythons, ordinary sized rock pythons, about 25 feet, 24, 25 feet, have killed and eaten people. So one twice that size would have no problem in eating a human being.
I suppose the only challenge they would have, Richard, is girth in regards to eating humans, because there are numerous stories, especially from Asia, around the Pacific, of unwitting farmers and local villagers who say they're going somewhere or they're looking after the apple orchard or something, and they disappear. And then 3 days later, the whole village turns out and they find this giant snake having a snooze under a tree with an enormous lump in it. And because I'm still surprised that some people seem to think that it just doesn't happen. But it clearly does happen.
Yeah. And these are with snakes that are generally around 7 meters long. So if we're talking something much bigger, there'd be no trace. It would just swallow you, and there probably wouldn't even be a bulge in the snake's body when it swallowed you.
Absolutely. Yeah, I don't think the villagers would be chasing down 50-foot snakes on our behalf, Richard.
No. But staying in Africa and staying on land, there in Tanzania, natives once went in dread of a bloodthirsty beast called the Mingwa, or strange one. It was supposed to be a big cat the size of a lion, but it had no mane, and it was a grey, brindled colour, almost like a tabby cat. And in one case, there was an Englishman called Captain William Hitchens, who was a magistrate of the village in Lidi in Tanzania, and he'd heard these stories because they turn up in folklore. They're like monsters from folklore that a hero has to defeat. And one thing in the folklore is that it starts out as an ordinary cat, and it gets fed more and more and more, and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. It turns into a mingwa, and they have to kill it. A bit like the Lambton worm was this little worm that was thrown down the well and got bigger and bigger and bigger, and it turned into this great serpent. So he dismissed it all till one night in 1922, and there was a market in the village of Lidi, and goods were left there in the village square overnight by a watchman who would oversee them. And one night the watchman vanished, and his body was found under a stall, and it had been ripped to shreds. And in the dead man's fist was a handful of brindled grey fur. And an old native district governor recognised the fur as that of the Mingwa, and he said that the beast had visited his village several times in his youth. Two eyewitnesses came forward, and they said that they'd seen one of this huge cat attacking the man. Then a few nights later, another watchman was killed, and this time this guy had 2 handfuls of this grey hair. And in the following month, there were more killings up and down the coast, and then they abruptly stopped. Then, in 1930, the beast was back, and there was a new wave of killings. And one of the people who was a victim was an experienced hunter who had been badly mauled but survived, and he was brought to Hitchens on a litter in the village of Machinga. And he said that he'd hunted leopard and lion all his life, and he insisted that the creature that attacked him was neither of these. In another case, a Western hunter, Patrick Bowen, investigated a case in which a Mingwa had carried off a young native boy, and he found this same brindled fur on a thorn bush, and tracks that looked like a leopard but were bigger than those of a lion. And to this day, nobody really knows what the Mingwa is. As far as I know, there's been no new sightings of it. But there is a colour morph of the leopard called melanotic. Now, melanistic is when they're all black, like a panther, but melanotic gives them this sort of brindled colour. But it wouldn't explain the extreme size of them unless there's some sort of weird genetic quirk going on as well in this part of East Africa that's now died out. But it just remains a mystery, the Mingwa.
Would that be kind of like a similar situation to the king cheetah, Richard? Because this is one of those things that I think the king cheetahs were first spotted about 100 years ago, and then they were so rare that people either thought that they died out for the best part of 50 years until I think they were caught on camera by a couple in the late 70s, and then they re-established. But I think they're still classed as a kind of, it's just a genetic mutation more than a subspecies of cheetah, isn't it, the king?
It's just a difference in the coat. The same way that a panther is just a melanistic leopard. Melanotic leopard is much rarer, but it gets a sort of tabby colour, which would fit except for the size. The only thing difference is the size. But that's not the only flesh-eating mystery beast. There's, of course, the Nandi bear, which is also from East Africa, and they're said to resemble stocky bears. And again, the natives go in terror of them. They're supposed to be man-eaters that particularly favour the human brain, and they're so powerful they can force their way through kraals, which are the barriers of thorn bush that natives use to protect themselves and their stock, and they'll push their way through and tear through doors or ceilings and carry people off. The only known bear from the African continent was the Atlas Mountains brown bear, and that was hunted into extinction in the 1870s. There was an African bear a couple of million years ago, similar to the short-faced bears of the New World. It was a big, long-legged, fast-moving thing, but that seemed to have disappeared a couple of million years ago. And the Nandi bear takes its name from the Nandi people and the Nandi Hills in Kenya. Geoffrey Williams, who took part in an expedition to the area in 1912, saw the creature and wrote of it in the Journal of the East Africa and Uganda Natural History Society. And he saw the beast while camped on an escarpment at a distance of no more than 90 feet. And he said it was 5 feet tall in the sitting position. And it looked like bears he recalled seeing in the zoo, only somewhat more stocky. And it shambled away into the mist on all fours. The Nandi people told him that sometime before, one of these creatures had gotten onto the roof of a native hut, ripped its way in, and killed all the people inside. And other tribesmen had set fire to the hut, burned it down, and killed the creature inside it. A young Nandi boy looked at a copy of Rudyard Kipling's Jungle Books, and he likened Baloo the bear to the Nandi bear. Now that you've got to remember here, this is in 1912, so it's before the awful, shitty Disney bastardization. This is the proper Rudyard Kipling Jungle Books with the original illustration.
Yes.
Charles T. Stoneman was a noted big game hunter, and he searched the Mau forests for the creature and was told that it entered native huts at night and killed people and favoured their brains. Sometimes it would just eat the brains. They'd bite the top of a person's head off and then eat the brains like someone sucking the marshmallow out of a walnut whip. And women gathering in woods in the forest would go missing, and later their bodies would be found always minus the top of their skull and missing their brain. In 1925, villagers asked the Kenyan government for help after a Nandi bear carried off a 6-year-old girl after forcing its way through an 8-foot thorn hedge, ripping through the mud wall of a hut. And again, it's something that doesn't sound like a leopard or a lion. The man who brought it in to hunt it was none other than Captain William Hitchens, who we met earlier with the story of the Mingwa. And he thought the creature had come from a rocky hill some miles away from the village or the deep forest behind it. And he set up camp on the hill. But in the middle of the night, the beast attacked his tent and tore it down, carried his dog off. And he said the monster's tracks were 4 times the size of a man's hand, far bigger than a lion. And he tracked it into the forests beyond the hills, but lost it in the jungle. And it's been postulated that this is some sort of a gigantic hyena. It might be some monstrous, either a freakishly large hyena. And hyenas, spotted hyenas, do turn man-eaters sometimes. A freakishly large, strangely coloured hyena, or maybe some sort of prehistoric relative of the hyenas. But again, it's something that remains a mystery to this day.
Well, I think the problem you've got with that, Richard, is that there isn't anything you could kind of suggest as an explanation for it, because once again, you've either got two trains of thought here. It's either an unknown creature or these people who are very aware of the creatures that live around them don't understand what they are. And there, for me, I always go for the former there, that it must be some kind of unknown creature, because these people are very aware of the predators that live around them.
But once again, as far as I know, there's been no recent cases of the Nandi bear. A few years ago in Malawi, there were a couple of spates of people being killed by a creature that they called the terror beast. And when they finally shot it, it was a very big hyena that had turned man-eater. But that was in Malawi, not Kenya. So who knows? It's still a mystery, but you don't have to be in the wilds of Africa to meet a cryptid that eats human flesh. And the next case is probably the most bloody, the cryptid that has killed more people than any other. It wasn't in the wilds of Africa or South America or Asia. It was in 18th century France, and it was in an area of southern central France called Gévaudan. It started in April of 1764, where a girl herding cattle in eastern Gévaudan was attacked by a monster. She described it as a monster, and luckily for her, bulls charged it and drove it back into the forest where it came from. But then on June the 30th, another shepherdess, a 14-year-old girl named Jean Boulet, was not so lucky. While she tended her flock, she was killed and torn apart by an animal of phenomenal power, and thus started a 3-year nightmare for Gévaudan. Between 1764 and 1767, the Beast, as it became known, killed 113 men, women and children. Many more were maimed and mauled, and countless livestock was eaten. And once more, the scenario plays out like a script for a horror movie, but unlike a film, it had no neat conclusion. And it's been over 250 years since these events, and investigators have tried to find out what the beast was, and suggestions have included an outsized wolf, a wolf-dog hybrid, human serial killers, a werewolf, a hyena, or some sort of prehistoric beast surviving in the remote wilderness. Now, it's important to look at the historic situation at the time. France had just lost the 7 Years' War. It was very costly. Gévaudan had suffered a series of cripplingly harsh winters. Disease had ravaged livestock, and to the already beleaguered peasant communities, news of the beast was just the icing on the cake. And the corpses were hideously mauled, some of them decapitated, most of them eaten or partly eaten. And the populace were used to man-eating wolves, and wolves didn't kill like this. Wolves don't usually tear people's heads off or carry them long distances. They knew that there was something different and more formidable. And the Bishop of Mende declared that the beast was a scourge sent by God as punishment for their sins. With the body count rising, this story reached the ears of King Louis XV, and the king sent his two most formidable huntsmen off to deal with the beast. And the pair led soldiers, including dragoons and mounted infantry, as well as peasants who had been given a temporary permission to carry weapons. But the hunts were all to no avail. The creature completely evaded them, and the killings went on unabated. The following year, they were replaced by the king's gun bearer. Oh, it's also interesting to note that the dogs they took with them, they were trained to hunt wolves, but they couldn't pick up the scent of this creature, suggesting it wasn't a wolf. Anyway, the following year, Francois Anthony, the king's gun bearer, was brought in, and on the 20th of September 1764, he shot a huge wolf, 130 pounds, and declared that it was the beast. And the carcass was brought back to much fanfare and put on display. Antoine was hailed a national hero and received money and titles, but the people who saw the body said it was nothing like the creature that killed them, so that had attacked them, the survivors. And the killings carried on even after this big wolf had been shot. So whatever this thing was, it was still a very large wolf. It wasn't the beast of Gévaudan, because the killings continued, and those who had been mauled by it and survived said that this wasn't a creature. It completely seemed to avoid organised hunts and carried on killing with impunity. And the fame of it was spreading outside of France and around the world. On the June the 19th, 1767, the peasant hunter Jean Chastel claimed to have shot the beast. He killed a large russet-coloured wolf-dog hybrid. And once more, the witnesses were adamant that the creature was not the beast that had attacked them. Now, there are good contemporary reports of this animal and what it looked like and how it behaved. And it was supposed to kill cows by jumping on their backs, pulling them over, and then throttling them by biting the windpipe. One survivor was bitten in the neck by it. He survived, but due to the oxygen being cut off to his brain, he was an imbecile for the rest of his life. In another case, the creature grabbed a child in a garden, and the child's mother jumped on its back. She said it was the size of a donkey, so it must have been big for her to jump onto its back. And she reached round to make the creature let go and squeezed its bollocks. So it was a male. Yes. And the creature, the beast let go, turned on her and scalped her with its claws. So it's not a wolf. Wolves don't hunt like that. Wolves worry their prey. They hunt in packs and they worry it, biting at the flanks and the sides. Now, the identikit from the witnesses say that it was reddy brown in colour. It had a tuft of hair on its head. It had large paws with claws, a great wide head with a muzzle with teeth. It roared, and it had a great long tail with a tuft at the end. What does that sound like?
A lion.
Because that's what it was. If you look at the way that it killed and the description and the fact that it roared and had a great tufted tail, this was a maneless male lion. And if you remember the man-eaters of Savo, the two lions that killed all the people along the railroad, they were maneless lions. And sometimes in areas where there's a lot of thicket, male lions don't develop manes at all. Now, you might ask, well, where the bloody hell did it come from? But the thing is, this is pre-revolution, and the aristocracy from the 16th to the 18th century had a fad for having private menageries. There was one at Versailles, but most landed gentry had small private menageries, and there was a roaring trade in exotic beasts. And just 50 miles from Jardivan was the biggest exotic animal market in the whole country that were importing all sorts of things. Now, we know about the beast of Jardivan because it was very well attested, but there were others from the 16th right up to the turn of the 19th century. There were other beasts at large in and killing livestock and people in rural France. There was one in the Limousin area just before the beast of Jardivan that killed people and tore their heads off. And if you look into it, there are dozens of these cases. But by the end of 1767, the story just peters out. There's no final confrontation with the monster. It just vanished, slipping quietly into legend, probably like all of the other ones. It may have been killed by inclement weather, or it may have eaten poison bait. We just don't know. But the beast of Jardivan was almost certainly a maneless male lion. And there's a very good book by a German mammologist called Karl-Hans Park. And it studies all the attacks, all the descriptions, all the modes of killing. And he says it's almost certainly a lion. He finds that the beast targeted adult humans far more than wolves do. I mean, six times more than wolves do. Wolves, when the rare occasions they do attack people, they generally go for children. But the beast seems targeting larger bodied prey to feed a bigger predator. And it was even shot with musket balls. And some of the people that shot at it said that when it was hit by these musket balls, it fell over, then got back up again and ran off, because the musket balls didn't have the stopping power, the power to bring down a lion. And as I said, wolves hunt with their teeth. This thing hunted with its teeth and its claws, and that grabbing of the windpipe is typical lion. If you see lions hunting wildebeest and zebra, they'll throttle their trachea or even put their mouths over the snout of their prey to suffocate them. So it was almost certainly a lion.
Yeah. Well, quite a few big cats go for the throat, don't they? I mean, leopards are renowned for it, Richard. So do tigers. I mean, the thing about Gévaudan is it's been a case that's fascinated me since I heard about it in the 80s as a kid. And as you mentioned, that brilliant book, there's also one of the best cryptid-themed films, I think, as well, Brotherhood of the Wolf.
Yes, they were on the right track. Yes.
Yeah. Which I think was a French-Canadian film from about 20 years ago, which is amazing. Don't ever watch the dub version because everybody's got very silly English accents in it, and the proper French version is far better.
I never watched the dub versions of anything. I'm a big fan of Japanese horror and of Godzilla movies, and I never watched the dub version. I always watch the original language. You lose the nuance in the speech as well.
Absolutely. But so for me, when I've looked at that and the little I know in regards to how animals attack and predate on prey, it's always struck me as being some kind of lion that escaped from a menagerie. And so I'm always perplexed, Richard, because I've seen people over the years put forward the theory that it was just a serial killer. And I've often said that only works if you don't know anything about the case, because people don't realise there are lots and lots of survivors. It wasn't just one or two. We're talking dozens of people. So you're looking at probably between 200 and 300 attacks over that 3-year period, and a third of the victims died in total. But there were numerous attacks where people got away. There's people who had their back clawed. As you say, there's people who were attacked, bitten round the neck, people who had serious injuries to limbs as they fought them off.
There's one place where a bunch of people it off with pikes, and they all got a good look at it.
Yes. Yeah. And so for me, I've never understood how people can put forward that kind of explanation for it, Richard, because you're basically picking cases that match your explanation and ignoring everything else, which is nonsense because, as you say, it's not unusual. It's not an outlier. There were lots of cases in the area throughout that period because of the gentry having these little private menageries with all kinds of creatures that were coming from Asia and Africa as sort of magical treasures that they could impress their friends with, pulling all these creatures from all over the world. I mean, when you tell people about one of the kings of England having a pet polar bear, Richard, that he kept on a chain and let it swim in the Thames, it was that era. The rich and powerful people of that era would have all kinds of animals in their private possession because it was a status symbol. So to basically just say, oh, well, it couldn't possibly be a lion in France is nonsensical because we know people had lions in France.
Yeah, absolutely. And people who say it was just a wolf, they've got no idea of how wolves kill. And it also ignores the people who saw it and said it wasn't a wolf.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, none of the survivors said they were attacked by a person.
Yeah. There's a case from Suffolk, a mythical case of what was called a dragon inhabiting these marshes. And they said it was a great, long, scaly thing with huge jaws and teeth, and it killed people and it killed livestock. And it terrorised the area, and they sent men with arrows to try and kill it, and the arrows just bounced off its scales with a metallic clang, and no one could harm it, and it just disappeared into the marsh in winter and was never seen again. And it's widely believed that was a crocodile brought from Africa or Asia that had got out from an early menagerie.
You mentioned the lions of Tsavo, Richard. What I've been amazed at is I know recently when they've been examining the jaws, they've found this massive ball of hair and DNA in it in one of their jaws, haven't they? And so they're undertaking to see how many people's DNA are in there, because people have often tried to underplay the Tsavo case and say, oh, it probably only killed a few. And because that one's, is it something like 130 they're supposed to have eaten?
Yeah, something like that.
But we know that happened because the two stuffed lions that were killed are they in the Smithsonian in America,
Yes,
I think?
they are, yeah. Yeah, they're taxidermied and
Yeah, so we know why, because obviously one of them had... I mean, this is the amazing thing about that case, is one of them had a bad jaw, a bad tooth, and therefore decided that humans were easier to chew and started going after them. But then another one thought, oh, hang on, this looks good, and they started working together. And so people say, oh, well, lions don't do that. But I've recently watched... Josh Gates has recently done an expedition unknown about this case in the last few months, Rich. So they went to Africa looking for maneless lions, and they found two males just hanging out together, just walking around. They've got this tracking system. So
there's a fallacy that male lions never hunt, it's just the female. But what happens is the big male lion will have a pride of females, and he'll have to protect them from other males, which will come in and kill their cubs. So that's his main job. They do hunt from time to time, but not as much as the females. But then you get these bachelor ones that don't have a pride, and they generally go around in pairs, and they hunt all the time. And you've got the tigress of Champawat that was finally shot by Jim Corbett, and she killed over 400 people, and it was found that she'd been shot in the mouth and had broken teeth. That's why she was killing human beings. But the Jardivan creature was probably just killing them because they were easy to kill. The famous Hokkaido brown bear that killed about a dozen people in one weekend, that turned man-eater because the human beings had shot all the prey, all the deer around there. It hadn't put on enough weight to go into hibernation. So that virtually wiped out a whole village in a very short period of time. And then you have Gustav, the giant crocodile of Lake Tanganyika, who's reckoned to have eaten about 300 people, and he's still at large. So,
Gustav, how long has it been now? Is it nearly 10 years since his last proper confirmed sighting?
But Lake Tanganyika is huge. There have been claims that he's been killed, but nobody has brought forth proof. People have tried to shoot him before, and all it's done is put a couple of dents in his scales. So it wouldn't surprise me at all that he's...
When it comes to crocodiles, Richard, do they move around? Do they change their favourite sort of nest area? Because obviously they'll often, hang around on a particular banking or find somewhere where they normally lay their eggs. But are they one of those creatures that will move and change around and go somewhere else, and therefore Gustav might have just fancied a change?
They'll go where the prey is. So if there's part of the lake that's got a lot of water buffalo, zebras, or even large fish, he'll probably go there. There was one case where a park ranger saw him tear the throat out of an adult hippopotamus. That's how big he is. He's never actually been measured. And when you read about him, they'll say he's about 20 feet long. Looking at photographs of him compared with hippos, I'd say he was at least 23 feet and weighing more than a Rolls Royce.
That's crazy.
Back to cryptids. One of the most disturbing unsolved murder cases in the US is that of a woman called Evelyn Consuela Roseman. And she's a 24-year-old masseur and stripper from San Francisco. And she'd taken a holiday hiking alone in Yosemite National Park, California, which is something I would never do, hiking alone in a place like that. 18th of October 1968, 3 hikers found her battered body at the base of Nevada Falls, which was a waterfall. And investigators determined that she'd been thrown off the 594-foot waterfall. But the waters were very low, and she'd not been swept off because her clothes weren't wet. And she had died from massive head injuries when she hit the ground after being thrown from 594 feet. But they said she'd been launched from this cliff way out. She wasn't at the bottom of the cliff. She was a long way from the cliff. And she hadn't fallen and bounced off rocks or trees. It seemed she'd been hurled by something immensely strong, and then afterwards pulled even further from the site where she landed. And then her clothes the trousers and top had been pulled up and down, and she'd been sexually violated. this story begs the question, what on earth is strong enough to pick up a full-grown woman and throw her so far off the edge of that waterfall? Even a group of people acting together wouldn't be able to do that. The strength involved seems to be something far beyond anything human. And DNA profiling was not used by the police until 1985, but I would be willing to bet a substantial amount of money that if they had DNA profiling way back then, the DNA that I've got from that seaman wouldn't have been human. Well, not what you and I would recognise as human, because I think what attacked her was a rogue Sasquatch. And this is because of the insane strength it would take to throw a woman, even if she was a small woman, so far. Now, usually there are, with Sasquatch Yeti, there are very, very few cases of these things supposedly killing or attacking people. They seem to have survived by becoming nocturnal mostly and keeping out of the way of modern man, and that's how they survived. But there are occasional stories of what might be termed rogues. And the most famous is the one from Theodore Roosevelt's book, Wilderness Hunter, when he was told by an old grizzled old trapper called Bauman that this was in 1892, but 50 years before the 1840s, that a friend and himself had been trapping near the Bitterroot Mountains between the Salmon and Wisdom Rivers in Idaho. And supposedly something had killed a trapper called Cluey there the year before. And they'd find their camp in disarray when they'd come home in the evenings. And they'd catch glimpses of some upright walking, foul-smelling creature. And it spooked them so much that they decided to pack up and go. And Bauman went off to collect the traps and left his friend in the camp. And on returning, he found the camp strangely quiet, and then found his friend's body drooped over a spruce log, and that his neck had been broken, and there were fang marks in his throat, but he wasn't eaten. And Bauman, fled the area, just took the horses and never looked back. Now, that case I've always wondered about, because the creature wasn't actually seen attacking him. It had been seen going around the camp and interfering with the camp, probably looking for food. But was it a Sasquatch that actually attacked Bauman's friend, or was it a puma or a bear that he disturbed when he came back? We'll never know. But there are other stories. In 1920, a guy called Albert Petka of Nulato, Alaska, was supposedly attacked by a bushman, the local name for a Sasquatch. He lived alone on his boat with his dogs, and dogs drove the hairy monster away, but apparently he'd been bludgeoned by it. I don't know if it hit him with his fists or hurled a rock or walloped him with a club, but he died of internal bleeding. But 23 years later, there was almost identical case where there was a guy called John Meyer, known as the Dutchman, who staggered into Ruby, Alaska, and said he was attacked by a bushman in his remote cabin, and the dogs had driven it away, just like the last story, but again, he died from internal bleeding. Well, the trouble with these stories is they're so long ago that they're hard to verify. And when he says a bushman, does he mean a Sasquatch, or does he mean a wild, feral human being? But over in Australia in 1910, two men were supposedly walking the Victoria Falls area of the Blue Mountains when a 10-foot gorilla-like creature emerged from a bush and attacked them. And it hurled a large rock at one of them, smashing one guy's skull as the other one fled. When the survivor returned with a party of armed men and dogs, the body was gone, only bloodstains remained. However, this story is attributed to Rex Gilroy, who is not the most reliable of researchers. This is the same guy who has claimed to have found Yowie skulls that are just oddly shaped rocks, and said that the ancient Egyptians had gotten to Australia and built pyramids, and there was a UFO base under the Blue Mountains. So we can't really take his word for this. But Tony Healy and Paul Cropper were on much sturdier ground with them because they are very, very diligent researchers.
Yes.
And they recount a disturbingly suggestive tale from their excellent book, Yowie, In Search of Australia's Bigfoot. And they heard it from the fellow Yowie investigator, Neil Frost. You may have heard of Neil Frost from the Blue Mountains. In the 1990s, Neil interviewed a mountain-based lawyer who in the 1970s had discovered a decapitated body behind a bush near the Warramoo bushfire station. The police said that the head hadn't been cut off, but had literally been torn from the body and thrown 50 feet. Now, what on earth is strong enough to do that? A kangaroo will kick you to death, and it'll grab a hold of you with its arms and then kick you to death. It won't rip your head off. A crocodile might bite your head off, but it's going to eat your head. And there are no crocodiles that far south. So was this a Yowie that did this? There have been very suggestive Yowie encounters where they seem very, very aggressive, much more than a Sasquatch or a Yeti. But it's another one we'll never know. We'll never know about.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of those as well. It's like the... is it Carl Henricks, who, 1943, Bennington Triangle, Richard, went on a hunting trip with his brother. They went out, they'd built camp, they'd gone out hunting. Brother came back, he didn't. The alarm was raised, and 3 days later he was found crushed to death under a tree, surrounded by giant footprints. His autopsy said it looked like he'd been crushed in a vice because his ribs had been basically forced into his lungs and his heart and killed him. And they just said they wrote it off as a bear attack. But I've never heard of a bear. I've never heard of a bear sitting on someone, Richard, because he'd been crushed. He hadn't been eaten. He hadn't been clawed. He'd been crushed to death. And he was found under a tree, and his gun hadn't been fired. His gun was still loaded.
If it was a bear, you'd have had claw marks and bite marks on you. Absolutely. There are two types of bear attacks. There are predatory attacks when they attack you to kill you and eat you, and then you'll be eaten. And there are defensive attacks where they get spooked and lash out, and they don't eat you after that. You'll still be torn up by the teeth and claws. And it does make you wonder, that the missing 411 books, it makes you wonder how many of these people have fallen victim to rogue Sasquatch.
I think sometimes you see some of those cases, and you have to look. I mean, there are some the disappearances in general, especially the ones that happen in fairly well-known areas, Richard, regular trails, holiday destinations, things like that. There was one the other year I was reading about, which I think was in Alaska, and it was like a fun run up a mountain. So there was, dozens of people running up and down this hill. One guy went up it and he completely vanished off the face of the earth. They've never found him. Never found him. There was like 150 people doing this run and he didn't come back down. They scoured the mountain. They never found a trace of him. Disappeared off the face of the earth.
And a lot of the times when they go out with dogs to track them, the dogs refuse to follow the scent. They're spooked by something. And they'll look somewhere thoroughly, find nobody, go back and look again, and the corpse has been returned to the area.
Yes.
It's all really, the missing 411 books are really spooky.
Yes.
There's something very strange going on.
Yeah, there's one particular case, and I can't remember the person's name, but they went out looking for them, and then I think the day or a couple of days later, they searched the same area and the body was laid on a tree, as though it had been placed there. And everybody's like, well, hang on a minute, we've been through here. How the hell has this happened? Baffling.
Then, not so long ago, there was a little boy that vanished, and there was a massive hunt for him. And he turns up, he vanished in sort of very dodgy environment in cold weather. He turns up fine. A few days later, he said, "Oh, a bear's been looking after me."
Casey Hathaway.
Yeah, that's him. The trouble is, there's been a number of cases like this, but the kids are always too young to be questioned later on with any reliability. But oftentimes they said they've been with a bear.
I always find it amazing that people say, well, it might have happened. Now, I know, Richard, that there have been situations in the past where humans have been protected, brought up, nurtured by animals. There are numerous cases of children who have been raised by wolves, and that is there for everybody to see. It's not something that's a fantasy or a fiction. You know, these cases really happen. It's not just legend and myth. And so you would begin to think, well, does that give strength to the fact that a bear may do that? But I don't think we've ever had that kind of situation where someone has had that kind of symbiotic relationship with a bear, Richard, compared to, say, a dog or a wolf that's happened in certain places in India and North America in the past.
Yeah, and also the famous Victorian one of the two girls, what were they called? Carla and Alma.
Oh,
yeah. It's
yes.
widely thought that now that was a hoax to drum up money for the guy's missionary centre. What's thought now is that they were mentally disabled girls, and he made this story up because human infants need to suckle for a lot longer than wolf pups. So if they were babies when they were found, the wolf wouldn't have made enough milk for them to suckle and grow up into little girls on.
They are peculiar cases when you come across them and see them sort of, pushing away cutlery and normal food and wanting to eat raw meat and things. It's quite peculiar.
Yeah, but I think it's widely believed now that they had some sort of mental disability. They may have been dumped by their parents and they survived by scavenging. Yes. Yeah. But moving over to the Soviet Union, in the autumn of 1925, Major General Mikhail Talipsky and his scouting party were tracking down a group of anti-Soviet guerrillas operating in the western Pamirs. And the guerrillas were trying to shake them off by heading into the Xinjiang area via the eastern Pamirs. And on their way through the Vanch district, the major and his men were told of stories of man-like monsters in the mountains, but they folklore. A little later on, they came across what looked like large barefoot tracks, human-like, in the snow line. And the dogs refused to follow the scent. And they ran across the path for some 150 metres to a sheer cliff that no human could climb. And at this point, they found dung containing dry berries. And they carried on their pursuit, and the major and his men caught up with the guerrillas in a cave. And a glacier had been split apart by a stone cliff. And the upper tongue of the glacier was overhanging the cliff, and a cave had formed in the stone cliff. And the men surrounded the cave and put up a machine gun. And one of the men tossed a grenade into the cave. Shortly after, one of the guerrillas ran out shouting for them to stop. And he said that any more shooting would bring the ice in the cave down and that the cave would collapse. The major demanded that they surrendered, and the man asked for time to talk it over with his colleagues, and he returned to the cave, and soon after there was a hissing noise, and fearing an attack, the machine gunner opened fire, and splinters of ice began to cascade down and fell upon the fugitives as they tried to escape from the mouth of the cave. 3 of the men were killed by falling ice, 2 more were shot, and 1 was wounded but survived, and he turned out to be an Uzbek tea house owner from Samarkand. And when they questioned him, he told them that whilst they were discussing the major's order to surrender, they'd been attacked by a group of hairy man-like creatures wielding clubs and howling inarticulately. And they'd appeared from the back of the cave, possibly by a different entrance, and they'd clubbed 1 man to death and then attacked the others. And the survivor had been beaten over the shoulder by one of these creatures with its club, and he fled from the cave with the monster in pursuit. And the wild man had been killed by the hail of fire and buried under the ice. When they cleared the debris away, they found the dead creature with its club, and it had been shot 3 times. And the team's doctor made an examination of it, and he said that it was clearly not human, but not an ape either. And it was covered by greying hair. They thought that it was fairly old. It wasn't that tall, it wasn't massive like a Yeti. It was about 5 feet, 5 inches tall. And it had this brownish hair, but greying, making it look like it was an older individual. and it had a thick brow ridge, a flat nose, wide, almost lipless, very thin-lipped mouth, big, flat teeth, but very human-looking. The eyes were very dark and quite large. It had prominent cheekbones. The ears were slightly more pointed than a human being's. But the chest and the muscles were very massive. So it's something different from a Yeti, but probably more like the Russian Almasty, which may be a descendant of Homo habilis or an early offshoot of Homo erectus. But 2 days later, the last surviving rebel died. But at the time, Topilsky and his team didn't think about preserving the creature. They just wanted to get on with their mission. And they feared another cave-in, so they didn't stop and investigate the cavern. They just buried this creature under a cairn of rocks, where it might still be there today, or whatever it is. The rebel, when he spoke to them, he said he thought that the creatures inhabited the cave, and when they'd come back, they'd found these people in their cave, and that's what made them attack and bludgeon one of them to death.
Yeah.
But when I was out in Guyana back in 2007 looking for the giant anaconda, our guide was a guy called Damon Corrie, who was a Eagle Clan Arawak chief. And he said that just 3 years earlier, 2004, some children were walking home from school some miles from the village of Pakuri. They lived in the next village. And the boy said a huge hairy man emerged from a stand of trees and seized the girl, and she was never seen again. And the police didn't bother to investigate because they were only natives. The native people in Guyana get a really raw deal because the blacks, Chinese, Indians have taken over everything. The actual natives people have got virtually nothing. If you go to the capital, Georgetown, it is the most dangerous place I've ever been. There's a palpable air of violence about it, and there's gangs everywhere, and it's completely lawless. You go out into the country, go into the native villages, everyone leaves their door open, and they're really kind and hospitable, and there's virtually no crime. But these Yeti-like beasts are called Dai in South America. The Italian archaeologist Pino Turola was told a story by his Indian guide in Venezuela, a guy called Antonio. And the man in question had gone up into the Pacaraima mountain range. And as they approached the savannah, 3 lumbering ape-like beasts with smallish heads and long arms had attacked them with clubs. And again, you always get the story about them attacking with clubs or hurling rocks. They attacked the group and killed his younger son, beat him to death with these clubs. 6 months later, Turola, the archaeologist, persuaded Antonio and some other Indians to show him their area in question, and they heard shrill roars, and the natives would go no further. And Turola himself claimed to have glimpsed one of these 8-foot-tall, ape-like creatures. So they're just a few of the stories of cryptids attacking and killing people, and they're very rare. I've never been worried about being attacked by a monster when I've been searching for them. I'm much more worried about human bureaucracy and the colossal pain in the arse going through customs and airports and flight delays. That's the stuff that worries me, not whether I'm going to be eaten up by a giant anaconda or clubbed to death by a hominin or anything like that. But these stories are really interesting. They are very interesting and sometimes very spooky.
Yes, they are indeed. I think it's easy often to dismiss some of them if you don't really delve into them, Richard. Like we've said about the Beast of Gévaudan or the Lions of Tsavo, the numerous amounts of people that disappeared in North America in certain places. I find it incredible when we know how normal creatures can react, or we sometimes find creatures in places that they shouldn't be at all. for whatever reason, and have thought this is amazing because I'm now the top dog here. I'm the main predator, and you know that animals often will find whatever way to adapt wherever they are, and when we talk about cryptids and the way they are and what they're believed to be in whatever form we're talking about. Well, if we're talking about undiscovered animals, then we still know that animals in general can adapt to any kind of situation and will take advantage of easier meals if it presents itself. So why wouldn't it happen, sadly?
Yeah, exactly. And if you look at something like chimpanzees, how dangerous they are, nobody really realizes just how savage chimps are. I've recently written a book on managing animals, which has the awful title of Creatures That Eat People. The title was forced on me by the publishing company. But in that, I record all sorts of attacks by crocodiles, sharks, bears, and that's the animals we know about. So animals we don't understand, there's nothing to say that occasionally they can't look on human beings as prey.
Absolutely.
I'm sure that 99.9 times out of 10, if you're lucky enough to glimpse a Sasquatch, it's just going to look at you and hightail it back into the forest. But you never know when one of these things is going to turn rogue. you get rogues in everything. There are very rare cases of, well, you get rogue elephants, but there are very rare cases.
Yeah.
There are a couple of cases where the elephants have actually killed people and consumed them, because herbivorous animals will occasionally eat meat, and mostly they do it to get the calcium from the bone. The deer will eat ground nesting birds, so will sheep, and you often see cows chewing on bones. It's to get the calcium. So sometimes the strangest things can turn man eater.
No, I've seen a cow eat a snake, Richard, so nothing surprises me, mate.
You've seen a cow eat a snake?
Yeah.
Did you say? Where was that?
Yes.
Where was that?
I saw a video a few years ago of it. I'm not sure if it was here, and it was eating an adder, but it was sort of like swinging it around and just chewing on it. And people said they reckoned it was doing that because of the calcium.
Yeah. Hedgehogs will eat adders.
Yeah.
Hedgehogs will eat small adders.
Well, needs must at times, Richard. Needs must. So, before I let you leave, Richard, you've got another expedition coming up. This time you're off to India. So, when are you going and what are you after this time?
I'm going the first 2 weeks in December, and it's a recce for a possible TV series that I'm trying to get off the ground with the French filmmaker Christopher Killian. The idea is we go around looking for the world's biggest crocodiles in Africa and Asia and Australasia, and try to film them with measurable frames of reference using drones and other types of camera. And we also talk to the people that live alongside them about what it's like living with these giant predators. There is a tribe that live near a lagoon in New Guinea along the river, and they say that an immense crocodile has lived in the lagoon for 50 years, but it's not eaten anybody. And they look on it as a kind of deity, a water spirit that protects them. And they believe that it chases the other crocodiles away to protect them. So it's probably a massive big male defending its territory. But that's one of the places we want to go to. And there are places like the Ord River in Australia, Lake Tanganyika in Malawi, South Africa, India, the Philippines, where there's supposed to be a monstrous crocodile called Potol, which is as big as the boats the local fishermen use. And one time he was supposed to have drawn alongside a pontoon on a floating house, and the guy's pontoon was 30 feet long, and he said this thing was about 29 feet long. So at that size, it's going to be weighing about 3 tons. So we're really hoping...
Is that where Lolong was caught, Richard?
Yes, yeah. They think that this one, Potol, was the one that was actually doing the killing, because the people that saw it attacking people, when they got Lolong, they said, no, that's not it. It was bigger than that. Lolong was...
And how big was Lolong? 24?
Lolong was 20 foot, which made him the biggest in captivity, but certainly not the biggest in the world. So they're a big, an average sized crocodile, an average 15-foot crocodile will kill a lion or a tiger or a leopard, it'll take down water buffalo, even giraffes. So scale that up to twice the size.
Deary me.
Well, I'm going out on this little recce to India, to Odisha, where there's supposed to be a very large crocodile on one of the national parks. I'm trying to get it on film and interview some of the local people. So we've got something to show to various film companies that we're going to present this idea to. So hopefully it'll get off the ground. And then next year, we're hoping to get out to Flores to look for surviving Homo floresiensis in the eastern end of the island. The anthropologist Gregory Forth, in his book Between Ape and Human, states that he's talked to lots of people in the eastern part of Flores that say that they've seen these things and that they're still alive in the mountains.
Brilliant. And I know when we spoke last time, Richard, you were tempting us with a sequel to The Highest Strangeness. So is that due soon as well?
That will be probably sometime next year. I've only just started on that. It's probably going to be called More of the Highest Strangeness, or perhaps Carry On Highest Strangeness.
Why not?
A whole other Parade of the Damned to record in it.
Brilliant. Well, I look forward to that, because the first volume was hilariously strange, Richard, and I always enjoy when you have a new book, because you find some absolutely magical gems of stories for our entertainment. So I'm no doubt this will be chock full of other weird and wonderful things, my friend.
Yes, well, I've got some doozies already. I've only just started writing it.
So, Richard, where can everybody get a hold of your previous work, follow you online, or keep up to date with what's going on, my friend?
Well, you can look on Amazon under Richard Freeman, and you'll see my books, including The Highest Strangeness and Creatures That Eat People. What an awful title. They're my two latest, but I've written a whole load of books, and I can be contacted on Dr3UK@yahoo.com or through the Centre for 14 Zoology, which is the organisation I work for, which is www.csed.org.uk.
Brilliant. Well, I'll put links, as always, to everything in the show notes. And thank you again, Richard, for sharing some terrifying stories of killer cryptids for everybody to enjoy. And I wish you all the very best, and I look forward to the next time we speak, my friend. You take care.
Thanks, mate.